Good morning, class. Today we want to look at idealism and education, the concept of idealism and education. This is the philosophy of education, and I expect that it's a continuation from what we actually dealt with. We had given a background to issues of philosophy. Today we want to continue to offer another concept, which is Unit 2, which deals with the idealism and education, or the philosophy of idealism in education. Now, in our lesson today, our emphasis is actually development of idealism. How did it develop? We look at the Platonic idealism, meaning Plato. What did Plato believe in? We look at a spiritual part of idealism, which we call religious idealism, and we also look at the development of modern idealism, issues of universal education, issues of educating the mind. So that is what we're going to look at. Then we will also proceed to look at idealism as a philosophy of education. Then that's when you're looking at the curriculum of education. Then finally, we also end our lesson with aims of education in relation to the role of a teacher as an idealist. So that is what we're going to look at today. So then we continue. Now, who are the proponents? Who are the proponents of who are the proponents of who are the proponents of idealism? We have about 6 proponents of idealism. Plato is a father of idealism. Augustine, Descartes, Kant and Engel, Tagore and Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. So there's Plato, Augustine, Descartes, Kant and Hegel, Tagore and Gandhi. So these are the proponents of the philosophy of idealism. So those are the philosophers or the people who studied the concept of idealism. Now let's look at it. What is idealism? What is idealism? According to idealism, a man or a person is born with a spiritual self. A person is born with a spiritual self. He or she understands his true nature only through education. So I'm born with a spiritual self. There is this part of me, the soul, my soul. Forget about the body. It's my soul. So I'm born with a spiritual self. But for me to understand the true nature of this spiritual self, it is through education. And that is a good background of idealism. Said we are born with a spiritual self, which we can only understand its nature through education. So you could see how the idealists emphasizes the importance of education in their philosophy. Now, idealism believe that it is only through the agents of education, the ideals of race, its cultural pattern are perceived, preserved, transmitted, and modified, and subsequently, in light of the new situation. So, remember, when we talk about an idealist, idealists believe that it is only through the agents of education that the ideals of race and this cultural pattern are preserved, transmitted, and modified, and subsequently, in light of the new situation. You'll be shocked that, according to the idealist, even the idea of race is not there, it's not real, it's here. Race is in our mind. If you want to think like a Caucasian, a white person, it is here. And if you want to behave like a black person, it's also your idea, it's here. It has nothing to do with the actual skin. So the issue of race, according to the idealist, is actually neither here nor there. The race exists just as an idea. It's up to you to get the best out of it. Now, let's look at the idealism and the aims of education. Idealism and the aims of education. Now, according to idealism, the aims of education are as follows. According to idealists, or according to the philosophy of idealism, the aims of education are as follows. Number one, exaltation of human personality. Exaltation meaning the development of human personality, a big person becoming better in terms of thought, in terms of mind. Universal education is at the center of idealism. Universal education is at the center of idealism. So that is number two. That is the second aim of education according to the idealist, universal education. So when our new government is talking about the universal education, free education from grade 1 up to university, that is the idea. That is the idea that they have. That is what they hope to achieve. That's the idea. So universal education is a concept of idealism. Number three, development of initiative and creative power. Development of initiative and creative power is the third aim of education according to the idealist. Development of initiative and creative power. Now let's look at the fourth aim of idealism in terms of education. Acquisition and enrichment of cultural environment. We acquire, enrich our cultural environment. That is the fourth aim of education according to the idealist. Acquisition and enrichment of cultural environment. Development of moral sense is number 5. Development of moral sense is number 5. That is the fifth aim of education according to the idealist. Self-realization is number 6. Self-realization, number 6. I'll go through the 6 aims of education according to the idealist, or according to the philosophy of idealism. Number 1, exaltation of human personality. You are exalted, you are lifted up. Your personality is lifted up because of the idea of the development of the mind. Universal education is number 2. Development of initiative and creative power. Because it's a mind. Remember that idealism is about the mind, not the body. So here we're talking about development of initiative and creative power. That is very important. When people become creative and innovative, it's about idealism. Is here. Acquisition and enrichment of cultural environment. When you have a rich culture, a culture that cannot be copied, that is about this. I know ZAF. There's a culture that you have as Zambia Air Force, a culture that is different from other defense wing. That is the issue of acquisition and enrichment of a cultural environment. So that if you see an officer from ZAF, they don't have to wear the uniform. You say, this is an officer from ZAF, depending on the culture that you have actually acquired and enriched. That is very important. Development of moral self. Development of moral self is a very, very important aspect of idealism. Development of moral self. You remember, this is what people call remember, as when we are born with a spiritual self, which can only be nurtured through education. And that is the concept of development of moral self, morality. And finally, self-realization. You reach a stage where I said, oh. So, those are the 6 aims of education according to idealism, or according to the idealists. Now, let's look at each one of them. Remember, number 1 was the exaltation of human personality. And then let's look at the exaltation of human personality. Now, so we are now looking at each one of the aims of education according to idealism. I started with the exaltation of human personality. Now, here, idealism believes that human personality is of supreme value and constitutes the noblest work of God. So God's most noble work is our personality as individuals. That's according to the idealists. So idealism believes that human personality is of supreme value and constitutes the most noble work of God. That's the idealist. Therefore, the supreme aim of education is to exalt the self, which implies self-realization. Exalt the self. Education should help an individual to become a perfect pattern. Since man is a spiritual being, or since a person is a spiritual being, the divine in man should be unfolded and brought into the consciousness by the means of education. So we are a spiritual being. Now there is that divinity in us that can only be unfolded through education. And then it becomes, its consciousness can only be done through education. Then the issue of universal education is also an addition or a continuation of self-realization. This should not be an experience of a chosen few. So education should not be an experience of the chosen few. Since it is universal, all the individuals should realize self, and education should aim at this. Now you remember, thought is not only for the few. We all have the mind. And since we all have the mind, the ideas in our head, then education should be universal. Because that is a vehicle to realize our spiritual self, to realize the mind and bring it into it, to unfold it. So that is universal education. Development of initiative. A person should modify his or her environment according to his or her own purpose, needs through his or her initiatives and skill. Now here it's about development of initiatives and creative skill. And that is what the aim of education should be according to the idealists. So the aim of education should be able to develop initiative, creativity, those skills. That's very important. Education then must foster inventive power of a person to ensure his mastery or her mastery over the material given to him. The resources that were given to us, how do we realize them? How do we make them? How do we add value? We use our power of the mind, the power of the mind. Then education should form the character, strength of mind, and expand intellect by which one stands out on his or her own feet and manifest divinity. So then what should education do? Education should form a character, strength of mind, expand intellect, by which one should stand on their own feet and manifest this divinity in us. That is the idealist. Enrichment of culture as the aim of education. So idealists believe that a person, himself or herself, is a creator of the cultural environment. So this cultural environment that we have, we created ourselves. So remember, everything starts in the mind. The mind creates the material. That is the idea here. So the mind is creating the material. So religion, morality, art, literature, mathematics, science are products of man's moral and intellectual and aesthetic activity. So the religious, morality, art, literature, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, these are our creation. They are a product of man's moral and intellectual activity. They are coming here. So then we enrich our own culture through the ideas that we have. Therefore, education should aim at teaching the child the importance of culture and its component. The child should be able to contribute to his or her culture and make every effort to preserve it. the component of One Zambia, One Nation. That came through the idea. So it was moving from one generation to the other. The people started the One Zambia, One Nation. Some of them are not here, but then through education, this has been preserved and passed to the next generation. It was Samba's idea, but education is a vehicle that has made it to pass to the next generation. Now, enrichment of culture is divided into 4 things. Number 1, do. It's not just about enrich. You have a civil action to do what is right. That's a do. To know. Civil capacity. You should know that this is right. That's a civil capacity. B. BE. Civil identity. Even when you are passing through that, you say, yes, this person is a Zambian. So B. Then cultural values. Then the idealism, and B, a big citizenship. You know, we're looking at a bigger part then. Then the next is development of moral sense. The most important aim of education is to develop moral sense so that the person who is learning may be able to distinguish between the right and wrong. For as long as we don't develop our moral sense, we can never know what is wrong and right. That is where this country messed up, because education never gave us the capacity to develop our moral sense. The rampant corruption, you are given opportunities to run a particular service, a servitude, servant leadership. What you do is the component of uwomba mwibala alya mwibala. You even chew the seeds ukulya n'embuto. Why? Because the development of moral sense is not there. That is why we are saying education should be able to develop moral sense. And that is the most important aim of education, is to develop the moral sense so that we as learners should be able to distinguish between the wrong and the right. What is right and wrong? Then education should develop the willpower of the learner so that he or she may be able to follow the good and reject the evil. These virtues can be developed by correct appreciation of the truth. Remember, the role of education in the development of the moral sense is that it should develop the willpower of the learner so that he or she may be able to follow the good and reject the evil. These virtues can be developed by correct appreciation of what is the truth, what is truth. Self-realization. The function of education is to enable individuals to realize self so as to establish harmony between his or her nature and ultimate nature of the universe. Now, self-realization is a component of self-actualization. So you just say, yes, I've reached, I've done what I've done. Now remember this. The beauty of life is to do something that is going to outlive it. That's the beauty of life. It's meaning the ability to do something that is going to outlive life. Your commitment, your servant leadership to society. What is that people are going to remember you when you have passed on? That's the issue of self-actualization. It's not about the accumulation of wealthy. It's about having used your mind to change others. Having used your mind to contribute to society. Today we're talking about Plato. Not because Plato was rich. We're talking about Descartes. Not because Descartes was rich. Mahatma Gandhi was poor. We're talking about KK. KK was never rich. But it is the ideas that he brought to this country that has built us. That is a component that I'm leaving. So KK, even at the time that he was dying, he had reached self-actualization. He did his part. It's about us now. Now, idealism and education. Now, let's look at idealism and education here. The idealism and education, we're talking about idealism and curriculum. According to the idealist approach, they approach the curriculum from the domain of ideas and ideals. Remember the two words. So an idealist approaches a curriculum from the domain of ideas and ideals. Ideas, the mind. Ideals, what is it that is right? So preference is given to the whole human race. Idealism aims at developing a true sense of appreciation of truth, goodness, beauty, attainment of spiritual perfection. So it's about the domain of ideas and ideals. And the most important aim is to develop a true sense of appreciation of the truth, goodness, beauty, and attainment of spiritual perfection. That's what it is. So idealistic philosophy insists on the creation of sound mind in a sound body, necessitates the maintenance of body health through proper physical activities. So the creation of the sound mind in the sound body. So an idealist curriculum comprises physical, intellectual, and spiritual activities. Three things are contained in the idealist curriculum. One, physical, intellectual, and spiritual activities. These will enable a man or a woman or a girl or a boy to develop fully. It therefore reflects a diverse experience. So you have three things. You have the physical body, sound physical body. Two, you have a sound intellectual, meaning the mind, willpower, and spiritual. So these things must be present in a person for you to be self-actualized, to realize self. And this is what makes you to reflect a diverse experience: physical, intellectual, and spiritual. That is the idea. So the curriculum should have those things, according to the idealist. Now let's look at the idealism and methods of teaching. According to the idealist, the teaching method is a weakest point in the idealist philosophy. Now, so that is a methodology, and you know you are doing teaching methodology. And according to the idealist, the weakest point in idealism is the teaching methodology. Let's see about it. Idealist school of thought advocates in employing traditional methods of teaching. So them is traditional methods of teaching. Self-activities are advocated for the learner. Instruction should be given based on the child's psychology according to Pestalozzi. So you only give instruction to a child according to the psychology of a child. If you realize that this child doesn't need instruction, they're at a certain level, don't give them instruction. So self-activities are advocated. So the learners should be able to do things on their own. So it's self-teaching. So Froebel, a philosopher and idealist, developed the methodology of play, which is known as kindergarten. So remember, idealism, the kindergarten is the teaching methodology under idealism, kindergarten, meaning child play. He regarded a school as a garden and a teacher as a gardener. So that is a kindergarten. So according to Froebel, who was an idealist, Froebel was an idealist. So what did this guy do? He actually regarded a school as a garden, or a school as a garden comprising of a gardener being the teacher and a garden being the learner. That is the idea of kindergarten. So idealism advocates 5 teaching techniques. What are they? Questioning, discussion, lecture method, single and group projects, and imitation. So what are the 5 teaching techniques in idealism? 1, questioning, discussion, lecture method, single and group projects, and finally imitations. Those are the 5 teaching techniques according to the idealist: questioning, discussion, lecture method, single and group projects, and imitation. Let's end our lesson with idealism and discipline. According to an idealist or idealism, remember, idealists do not advocate a free discipline, as it may lead a child astray. This school of thought advocates for strict discipline for self-actualization. So learners must be disciplined strictly. If you don't, they become or they go astray. So there's strict discipline. And so this idea is to say, even if you have allowed the child to play, child play, kindergarten type, guardian and gardener, remember discipline is cardinal, otherwise they will go astray. That is so this school advocates for strict discipline for the child learner to actually become self-realized. So the teacher's guidance is necessary at every step, as he or she would impress upon the learner the importance of higher values. The teacher has to provide such an environment to children to realize high values, a deserved rewards for a child who has learned to live under self-imposed regulation is advocated. So the position of a teacher in idealism is very high. An idealist teacher is one who has attained self-realization. A teacher is a practical person and leads an ideal and righteous life. His or her personality is a source of inspiration for the learner. His or her personality is a source of inspiration to the learner. I thank you, class.